and of course pandemics specifically, and see how they reflect on our current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, and if we can learn anything, and if we have learned anything, and maybe better still, what we should be learning from the past. We've been hearing a lot that the past does not replicate itself. We don't have the same events happen again and again, but I've heard the wonderful saying that history rhymes. And boy, at the moment we are having a very good ear of rhyming as we are recreating our same knee-jerk reactions that seem to be stuck in history. So we're kind of hardwired to do the wrong thing, and maybe together today we can think about ways to get unstuck and think anew about how to respond to the pandemic. So with that, I want to just reintroduce myself. Bob, you did such a wonderful job, so that maybe this is superfluous. But my first language is Dutch, and my second language is German. And then there's a long time nothing, and then comes a very difficult language, which is English. And especially your spelling is horrible. We, the Dutch, we recreate our spelling every 50 years. So my Dutch spelling that I learned in elementary school is already old-fashioned. They can see that you can time people by it. And but you in England, in English language, you hold on to quite medieval tropes and spelling versions that are a challenge. My field is psychology of religion. My special interest is to understand why people believe, and what makes belief so persistent, even in the face of facts, and how we can harness beliefs for the good, but also definitely for the worse. In the past couple of years, I've been expanding my research to the medical humanities and critical health humanities, which includes my interest in the history of medicine. So I'm a newbie in my own research in this field. And again, my interest remains in the present, and how psychology, spirituality, and religion intersect in the modern age, where we are, of course, defined by science, facts, and progressive understanding of disease. I teach in the Religious Studies and Classics department, and with no further ado, my alma mater is the Vrije Universiteit van Amsterdam in Amsterdam, the so-called free university, free meaning that it was funded by a theological movement in the 19th century by Albert Kuipert, and a Protestant reformer, and who thought that theology and religion specifically was the queen of all sciences. So he built a very ugly building, but the top floor was the theological department. So we had this great view from Amsterdam. So that was my biggest takeaway. And the other picture is Tübingen, where I grew up, and where I went partially to high school, and studied at the University of Tübingen, and renowned university, also in theological studies. And the best claim to fame is, of course, it was the university also where Ratzinger now, the emeritus Pope, Pope Benedict XVI taught, together with Hans Küng and other famous theologians, and many, many more, too many to mention. But if you ever travel, this is my pitch to students, if you ever want to go, do go to Amsterdam and go to Tübingen, two of my very favorite places in the world. And I've been missing this summer. Maybe that's the nostalgia. So before we kind of dive into this 2 hours that we are together, and in which we're going to unpack the question about religion and the pandemic, I want to do some preambles. First of all, you're all going to be guinea pigs. and congratulate yourselves on that, because I've been looking, especially this semester, since the whole university has moved online, to teach Socratic method online. And most of all, my goal is how to create community, even in the face of being stuck at our own home, staring into a screen and getting headaches, calling the Zoom freeze. So I've been exploring with my students how I can reach out and create community. Students have been really impacted by the pandemic. I claim maybe even worse than we as older generation, if I may be so generous, to say, because we are older, we have life experiences and know that this will pass, maybe not as soon as January, but it will pass at some point and we will all see each other again. But for young people, it's been devastating because they do not have that experience of the future, and so many opportunities and dreams have been shattered. So they are I found a high level of anxiety and depression, and the loneliness is the not connectedness is the biggest devil in the room. So creating connections with them and experimenting. So with that long little pitch, I want to suggest that we're going to do breakout sessions. Breakout sessions is a unique platform or ability that Zoom offers, that I can randomly put you into a room. You will be a virtual room with people you might not know or have selected yourself. They will be random, and I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do it twice. In the beginning, after I introduce some concepts, I'm going to randomly put you in a room with one other person just to see if it works, and ask you for 5 minutes to talk to each other based on a specific question. And I'm the master. I'm like the big master person that kind of manipulates your screen. And after 5 minutes, I will give you a 1-minute warning and ask you to come back and to report back on your experience with this other person. If that goes well, and if nobody got lost in cyberspace, I will finish at the end again with a final question with a bigger group to kind of expand our experience and see if it also works. The theory is that this really helps engage people to connect better, also, even though we're far apart, and to deepen learning. So with that said, I want to turn back to my topic for today. Oh, and Bob has asked me to interrupt myself, is the rules of engagement. I cannot see all of you, by the way. I only see, because I see my screen. Let me see if I can see all of you. I can't. I see only 6 of you at the most. But if you have questions, please put it in the chat. Degas has offered kindly to monitor the chat, or raise your hand, and Bob, you will have to be my eyes and ears if you are able to see everybody's hands. But do interrupt. I am very much of learning is interactive, and please engage. If you think that I'm talking Dutch and not English, do let me know. I'll try to rephrase and reorient it, and then maybe try German first before I really find the right language again. But this in joke, please always let me know if there is anything I need to explain further. So with this all explored and our ground rules articulated, the question of today is religion and the pandemic. And I will be gearing to the final question: what is the role of religion in the pandemic? And finally, does faith have a role in public health and how we deal with the pandemic? And if so, what is it? And if so, why not? So that is what we are going to be building towards. But to start, I want to, of course, introduce you to religious voices have been strong and loud within this pandemic. And the basic I want, knee-jerk is a negative connotation, but we are hardwired as humans to find meaning. And it has been criticized by neuroscience and by the life sciences as a survival tool that has misfired and in a negative way has produced religion to bring superfluous meaning to random events. And of course, through history, we know no other response than giving meaning to the world we live in and finding higher meaning and purpose to lead us through it. This is, of course, a famous picture of a little boy in South America. God protects you against the COVID. That in a moment of a pandemic, we reach to meaning and we find solace in our beliefs and deities. I want to start to really focus on the here and now and remind you that by March, early March, this is in the second week of March, we knew about the pandemic, but everything was still going forward as normal. And people were praying at the Western Wall as they always done, and there was no distancing and of course, no disinfection. Just 2 weeks later, by the end of March, this is the scene at the Western Wall. It is sanitized and strict rules and appearances were enforced. And with this radical change and the shutdown of the world in such a short amount of time, we are all left with trauma. We not only here in America, but throughout the whole world kind of rippled to a halt, and all our normal ways of interacting, socializing, being together, and our normal days and routines were altered for and frozen with very little warning. The good news is it was all together. It was not just America or just Europe or just Asia. What makes a pandemic, of course, a pandemic is that it is collective and global. And I actually will get into the terminology more specifically. Over the world, but also here in Arizona and in Tucson, religions have responded. Religious community have stood up and offered support. And you are all familiar with organizations within the Jewish community, the Jewish Federation, the Jewish Community Foundation of Southern Arizona, but also interfaith community services and our Arizona faith networks, where Jewish organizations are part of, all came together and stepped up and stepped into the communities to offer help and to offer ways to reach out to the needy and the most affected. This is in the pandemic. I want to actually hold up one person that is especially important to me in my research and is one of my really heroes throughout my studies, is Jonathan Sacks. And if you are not familiar who he is, I'll give you a little introduction to his work. But he is a phenomenal man who is quoted in one of his TED Talks in 2017, the question of, is there something we can do, each of us, to be able to face the future without fear? And note, this is well before the pandemic, but there was already fear before the pandemic. And his answer is, we can move from the politics of me to the politics of all of us together. And if one thing I take away from this phenomenal person, and I call him the prophet of our modern times, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who just died this month on the 7th of November, way too young at 72, of cancer. He is an Orthodox Jew. He was the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom from 1991 to 2013. knighted by the Queen in 2005 and made peer of the House of Lords in 2009, just to give you a taste that it's not just religion, but also politics and a deep ecumenism and an interfaith understanding out of his Orthodox Judaism, reaching out to all of us, also outside of his Jewish faith, to be included in what makes the me, we, and us all better. The book that I'm mostly inspired in, which I actually got to know him, is his 2014 writings, The Great Partnerships, Science, Religion, and the Search of Meaning. In my field that I try to bridge the science and the humanity, religions, and science. He is a wonderful voice against the exclusion of religion belief and the inclusion of the humanity based on the sciences, not the either or, not the war between religion and science, but the working together, and together we're richer and better for it. If you do not know him, he has 2 TED Talks that I highly recommend that are inspiring, especially in this time. And actually just before he died, he just posted his last TED Talk this month. So Jonathan Sacks and the religious community set the stage of a response to a pandemic that has affected us all. But let's go and take a moment just to the basics. And this might be redundant. You all know this, you're educated people, but it's always good to repeat, as I tell my students. And the saying goes, if you haven't heard it 6 times, you haven't heard it enough. So with this, COVID-19, what is the COVID pandemic that we embrace this, and what should we know on a scientific basis? So COVID-19 is a novel coronavirus, which means that there are many coronavirus before, but this is a new version. The coronavirus 19 was, of course, discovered in December 19. That's why it's 19 and not COVID-20. And it is an illness that causes a virus that spreads from person to person. It's infectious. The exact name of the virus is a severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2. That's the official name. And the virus that causes the COVID-19 is new, as it is different from the SARS-CoV and the MERS-CoV that went before it. It is said to be less severe than those before it. And remember, we heard that it was just like the flu. Well, that was the beginning of the virus, where we didn't understand that it was also a lot more infectious, as we are learning now. But all of us, we are still in the infancy, really understanding this very treacherous and hard to understand virus. It's a pandemic, and the basic terminologies here, epidemiologically speaking, is diseases can be endemic, epidemic, and pandemic. And I was teaching last semester, and I was so excited for my students, and this was well before I realized how atrocious this pandemic would be. We could see it move from an endemic state in Wuhan, China, to an epidemic version all over China, to when it was finally called, we were waiting and holding our breath, and it was criticized, the HWO was criticized that it was way too late to call it the pandemic. But these are, as you can see, all very fuzzy lines and demarcations, and with every terminology comes also the ripple effect of importance and reaction. 2020 hindsight is always best when we know when it should have been called a pandemic instead of an epidemic, but lo and behold, we are in a pandemic stage. Now to the history of pandemics. As humans have spread across the world, so have infectious diseases. I'm fascinated to hear that and listened to the cyber babble of when will we know the origins of the COVID-19 and where was it? Where did it come from? It must have been in, and then you get a lot of conspiracy theories. It must have been in a lab in Wuhan and to devastate America, or last I heard it's actually in a lab in America because of I don't know, the random people on the top of the elites that would want to pretend that it came from China to take over the world. A lot of fear, a lot of unscientific reasoning, and forgetting that we've had pandemics all through human history. They are nothing new. This one is also nothing new. Actually, it's a little bit late. We have been predicting a pandemic with all our global traffic and travel and our intercommunication with each other. The history of pandemics is a fascinating thing, as it goes back to our scientific understanding and our changing paradigm in which we understand illness and disease. One book that some of you might still remember that was a bestseller and kind of introduced us already, this kind of epidemic or viral understanding of human histories by Jared Diamond, Guns, Germs, and Steels kind of already introduced this, that with the trade route, with our connection with each other, there also goes disease and death. Understanding infectious disease is challenging for the human mind, and it took until the end of the 19th century for us to grasp that there are little organisms that we now call germs, bacteria and viruses that can make us sick. But until the 19th century, and I'll get to that more in detail, it was not understood and highly rejected. It was understood out of a human understanding that, of course, we got sick through miasma. And it's a term that I'll get to as well, that it is foul air that makes us sick. The earliest known infectious diseases, we'll go into its histories, are smallpox that has been dated back to early Egyptians in the mummies. We can see that smallpox has ravished our human history. And leprosy, very prominent also in religious writings, and the way of being marked by God through leprosy, through skin disease. Of course, much later, it was diagnosed and understood as a bacteria. Malaria as a parasite, also very closely related to the miasma theory of disease, that malaria comes from, also from Italian, from foul air. Tuberculosis and influenza, we'll get to those later. The point I want to make here is the more civilized we become, the more likely pandemics occur. The bigger the cities, more trade, the more we travel and fly to distant lands and increase with other populations, the more we bring good things and take home bad things. Before I want to actually take a breath and kind of, after looking at a kind of the big panoramic view of of history and diseases, I want to kind of run through some of the big ones throughout history before I kind of really concentrate on a couple. If you may have seen, in my title, when Bob asked me what I wanted to talk about, I had threw the kitchen sink at you all and wanted to, of course, talk about all of these diseases, but decided in the eye of time and also in depth of understanding our present situation with faith and the pandemic, I want to just highlight a few. But before we go into our first breakout room, I want to just run through the big events of the history of diseases that are maybe for a discussion for another time to return to. Interesting to note that the plague of Athens in around the 5th century BC, 4th century BC, is the earliest recorded pandemic. And it was written down by a famous historian, and it was considered a plague, but we don't call it a, we don't know it was definitely not the bubonic plague that we know now. And PhDs are written about which illness it could have been, and we still do not know. It could have been typhus, it could have been typhus, typhoid or typhus. I hope that's the correct pronunciation. Other people have thought it was indeed smallpox. We don't know, though we have a very specific description. Important to note is that diseases present itself and get a name like plague that is not the same way that we use, that we're very careful when we look back at diseases or read history, that we don't project our modern concept, it's called presentism, and think that people in the past talked about plague, that is what we scientifically call plague. Not at all. They could have been very different diseases, or even diseases that don't even exist anymore. The plague of Athens, and one of the religious, learning tools, takeaways is that the effect of a plague that was so devastating in Athens, I don't know if you remember the history, Athens was surrounded by Sparta, and they closed the walls, and they were, all of the rural population had moved into Athens. So there was a big overpopulation in Athens, and a disease, the plague broke out, and it was devastating. And of course, good Athenians, they prayed to the gods, they did all the rituals they could think of, and nothing helped. The gods were silent, and people died and died. After the plague was over, and after the Athens kind of resumed their normal lives, they rejected the gods and turned to a new god. So out of the ashes of the Athenian plague arose the cult of Asclepius, the first ever personalized god for health and healing. After the whole pantheon of gods failed them, they anointed a semigod, Asclepius, as a god of healing. And this is a very important beginning of a reframing of religion and medicine towards a personal God that will help you in the time of need, away from a more polytheistic, diffuse understanding. Then come the Antonine plague in Minor Egypt and Greece and Italy too, and those are the illness that I'll spend a little bit more time on, the plague of Justinian, and that's the first wave of the Black Death, and then it's known in the 14th century in Europe under the Victorian term, Black Death. This is a later term called on this devastating event that raged through Europe, especially in the northern countries and England. Want to point out smallpox and measles. We Europeans, and this is us and not you, I will take responsibility for that. The Europeans' invasion brought these devastating diseases to the New World, and it was destroying 95%, killing 20 million people or more. These are all estimates. And talking about trade and being immune yourself and yet being able to make other people sick. And we are very aware of that, the non-symptomatic spreaders of disease that we know with the COVID-19 now as well. Typhus in the 30 Years' War, in the 17th century that spread, and also a smallpox that ravaged through the Americas, North America and the Caribbean in the 18th century. And of course, the big breakthrough also helped understand the scientific revolution and the new scientific understanding of the germs theory goes back to the cholera epidemic, especially in England, that came through the Ganges River up to Europe, and especially in France and England. And if we have time, we can talk about John Snow and the realization that disease is not in the body as the humoral system of the time would predict. It's not the whole person understanding of disease, of balances, these wonderful humoral understandings of wet and cold and dry and moist and bile and all these wonderful humoral understanding of a balance of your humors, your fluids in your body, and that is the source of disease. And it took us so long to understand, no, it could be something outside. It could be, as with cholera, it could be waterborne. And John Snow is one of the great heroes that did not understand the germ theory, actually rejected it, but did realize that people were getting sick from cholera, this exotic disease that came from India. They could see it coming with the trade routes and could study it as it was spreading as a pandemic, from an endemic to an epidemic to a pandemic event. Slowly, it reached the shores of England, and they could not understand how it could infect so many people. So now that we have this kind of prelude, and before I kind of dive into more specific diseases, I want to everybody take a breath, and I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, if I know how to do that. Yes. So I'll see you again. And I want to do one of my first experiments with you. So bear with me. This again, I'm going to do a breakout rooms with you. And I'm going to be the mastermind. I'm going to, without you being able to resist, I'm going to put you in a room with one other person. I hope that my random magic will work, that you'll be with somebody. And if you're together, you'll be the three of you. You will be with somebody that you don't know or don't know as well. And I want you have 5 minutes to introduce yourself if you don't know each other. Bob says that you all know each other since years and years and do not know what to talk about. So I will give you something to talk about. So do introduce yourselves and maybe find something that you have in common, and specifically then focus on how the pandemic has been for you personally and for your community. So your kind of nuclear community, for your friends and families, and how it has affected it and your life. So a time of communal sharing. As good students, you can talk about whatever you want. You don't need to listen to the professor. But I do want you, when you come back, I want to have maybe everybody just see one thing they learned from the other person. You're not going to talk about what you learned, what you already know yourself, that you already know, but what you learned listening to the other partner that you had a chance to talk to. So what is it, something you learned, how the COVID has impacted this other person you'll be introduced to. So bear with me, I'm going to do the magic. Any questions? I see there's I'm going to quickly check the chat to see if there is a question. Good, I think there's no question or scare, and I will also bring you back, so no worry. The question is to introduce yourself again and how the pandemic has affected you. If you could share that with somebody, and you will become asked when you come back to share something new you learned about how the pandemic affected somebody else that you just met.
Just a reminder that everybody's currently on mute. You want to be unmuted when you're in your breakout session. So you
Does everybody know how to do that? And maybe I can do
other.
that now. Let me see if I switch. I apparently have the ability to unswitch. Dega, do you know how to unmute everybody? Let me see if
I do.
You
Just
do?
give me, yeah, just give me a moment.
Brilliant. You have actually somebody. So then
Yeah,
I will
I
go.
think we can unmute ourselves.
As
Yes,
long as you're allowed
yes.
to, that's fine. Okay.
Top right corner of your own private little screen, you'll get a little drop down menu and then you can say
Okay.
unmute.
good. Good luck. And I hope I see you back after the experiment.
So far. I don't know why I can't see it through the laptop.
Niet weer 16 tegen door. I have to think of a number of. There you go.
Okay.
You join breakout room 6. Okay, join. Says join. What did you do, honey? You're supposed to join it.
I'm going to join here. Hello.
Hi. I don't know that we've met, Bob, and my name is Rini, and this is my husband, Jacques.
Hi.
Hi, Rini. Hi, Jacques. I actually think we probably have met coming and going. So, but it's very nice to see you. And of course, I've seen your name all the time. So,
Float up. Yeah.
so I guess part of the question, actually, how it's affected you. My interesting question is, when did you realize something extraordinary was going on? Do you have a memory of things being normal and then one day things didn't seem normal anymore?
Yeah, and I don't know if I can really pinpoint it, but I remember when I had a sort of a change of consciousness. I had been hearing about this terrible disease and that it was spread kind of like the flu. And Jacques and I were eating in a restaurant, in a Japanese restaurant. We live in Chile, so we're down here in Chile, and we're in a Japanese restaurant, and there's a little boy sitting at the table with his family, and he is sneezing all over the place without covering his mouth. His parents aren't saying anything. I mean, at this point, nobody's masked, nobody's even thought of that. But I just remember just like having to hold myself back to tell this woman, please teach your kid to cover his mouth when he sneezes, because I was thinking of the virus. So that's my first. How's about you, Bob?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about it, because I happened to be out in our laundry room looking at some things in the storage there, and I came across a shopping bag full of Clorox disinfectant wipes. I mean, packages and packages of it. And I remember the day, it was in the first week in March. I remember being in the Target and walking up and down the aisles. It was just, and the shelves being empty, and them bringing out an entire, like a truck, a little hand cart full of these disinfectant wipes. And I remember something in my head saying, I've heard something bad is happening. I should just grab a bunch of these. And I did.
Yeah.
And there they still are, because we've now kind of eased up a little on that part of it, on wiping down all of our counters every single hour and doing that. But that stands out, that very time. And another time I was also in a Walmart and saw somebody that same week. That was the last week we were really out in the world, and seeing somebody on a line, like putting lipstick on and doing all these personal things and wiping her arm on her nose and thinking the same thing you were thinking, though it was here. I mean, it was right like down the street, and I'm going, are you not aware that something might be going on? Now, you were in Chile, by the way? Did you say?
Yeah. Jacques' work brought us down here about 3 years ago, but I happened to be in the US. We just got back to Chile, and that was quite the adventure, getting back into a country that was in lockdown. But that's another story for another time. But is Marcia joining us?
I am, because I was all by myself. So,
Oh, poor
Oh,
thing.
hi.
Welcome.
thank you. I'm a member of Or Hadash right
Yeah,
now.
as are we. So
Yeah, and I'm kind of new. I moved a year ago, June, but I still feel pretty new, and so I don't know too many people here, or except for like Or Hadash people and my book club library people.
nice. All right. Well,
Mm.
welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been attending your services and the Thursday 3 o'clock group.
Oh, good. Well, glad
Yeah,
to
I
have
love
you.
I love those people, because I'm originally from the Catskills in New York, and they're all Bronx and Brooklyn people. So we do all this Jewish geography together.
I also am a Bronx person
Oh.
from my youth, and yes, spent my parents dragged me to the Catskills pretty much my
Well, I
entire
grew up there.
youth.
I was a native, but my dad was born in Jersey City, but he grew up in the Bronx. And so I tell people you can't, because I moved here from a northern suburb of Chicago. And I said, you can't be mad at me. It's in my DNA that I'm a Yankee fan forever. So,
Well, I'm not a Yankee fan. We can leave that for another time. But
Yeah.
Mark, so what's your thoughts? What we were asking the question of when you first became aware that this was something extraordinary versus normal.
Well, I'd heard about it as early as January, and this is what happened. I have a daughter who lives in Beacon, New York. Are you from? It's not too far from Hyde Park, where FDR is. But anyway, it's on the Hudson. I guess about not even an hour from New York City. But she had lived in Manhattan. She's a psychiatrist, so she has an apartment in Manhattan, and she has a weekend home in Beacon, where she's been camping out since the pandemic started really raging. But she was in New York taking the subway and everything, and she's a snowboarder, and her snowboarding group in January went to a ski resort in Utah. And a few days after she flew back, she started to get deathly ill.
Oh, no.
And she didn't know what it was. She said it was some kind of flu. And I said, it doesn't sound like flu. And she's asthmatic. So I'm like, I kept telling people, I knew about it in January, because I kept saying, I hope my older one doesn't get it, because she'll die. She's asthmatic. But anyway, she told me she had fever. What she was worried about was she couldn't talk. She had totally lost her voice, and she's a psychiatrist, so that's a total problem. She was going to somehow making it to Lower Manhattan to her office every day on the subway. So, and she apparently had the virus, but she kept saying it's some kind of quirky kind of flu, but she was a little worried because she can't breathe. And I said, you get yourself to a doctor, doctor, heal thyself. And it took her a few weeks, but she recovered. And then she texted me and she said, I had COVID. I had the textbook symptoms. And so I kept praying to God every night to thank him for sparing her life, because as I said, she gets terribly asthmatic with any kind of respiratory infection. But anyway, so that was my first introduction to it. But as I said, I'm here, I'll say this fast, I'm pretty much by myself. So the way it impacted me was my mourning for everybody who was sick or lost people, or the people who had their lives cut short. I mean, it affected me emotionally, but it didn't change my life that much, because I've been alone since I moved here basically a year ago, June.
Well, you're not alone now.
Oh, well, thank you.
Okay, we've been asked to leave breakout, so we're going back. But thank you all. This was good. We'll see you later on in the session.
To cut Beth off, because we were in a really good conversation, and but hopefully we'll see each other again and we'll talk more.
Yes, it's good feedback. It could have been longer, in other words.
Right.
I was thinking from 5 minutes is a long time from, but nice that Beth and you, Aline, that you got to meet, and you didn't know each other.
No, did not.
Good, very nice. And Ruth, how did it go for you? You have to unmute or else I can't hear you. I see that Ruth is talking.
I can't hear it.
There we go. Hello, welcome back. And
Still
Ruth,
muted.
Still muted. Let me see if I can.
Oh,
I think most of us are back. I think everybody is back. Welcome back. Thank you for being guinea pigs today. You all survived. I didn't get lost in cyberspace. I want to maybe go around the circle and just get a feedback what you learned from your new encounter, and how the pandemic, as the focus of today is, of course, understanding not only the past, but how the pandemic is affecting all of us. And may I start with, who shall I start with? Michael and Sonny, do I pronounce that correct?
Honey K, yes.
Yes, Sonny K, that's a double name. Could you let us know who you are and with whom you spoke?
until I was name.
He visited with Rabbi Salson, and he was not a stranger to us. So it's maybe a different kind of conversation, but it was interesting that all three of us felt not too deprived by the circumstances of the pandemic. And because we felt we were able to communicate with people, and we have things that keep us busy that we enjoy. And I think that kind of summarizes it. Michael, what do you think?
Well, Rabbi also talked about the fact that his wife is able to visit him, and what he misses is the ability to interact with the community at large in terms of the theater and the other activities that make Tucson such a vibrant community. But he has been getting out and about and doing it safely.
And we feel that we've gotten to know him a little bit because we're at services on Zoom, of course. I enjoy them particularly because no one tall sits in front of me, and which is always the case. And so we feel connected. We see the writers, we've seen the Bladders a little bit, and a number of other people who are not present today. So, as I said, that also is something that we are not deprived, don't feel that we're missing out. We even went to high holiday services without leaving home, and organized a number of people who live in our community so that we would all experience and watch them together. So, and we also realize this is the things that I'm citing are not the case for many other people.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Count your blessings. That's very important. Should I do it popcorn, or do you want me to just call on people? Ruth, I see you on my screen. Would you introduce the person that you've been talking to and yourself?
Okay. I was talking to Belinda, and her husband's off in the corner. They're new temple members, but they were saying that I was saying something about I missed doing community activities like the food bank and the zoo. And Belinda was saying, I hadn't thought about it, charitable contributions were something that was of concern, but also they're starting with an exercise program in their area.
Wow.
So they're going to be doing that.
And Belinda, Belinda, what did you learn?
Well, our situation, my husband and I is a little different from a lot of people. We don't have parents, we don't have children, we don't have siblings. So we are not in the position of so many others, including Ruth and her husband, who miss family. We don't have the family to miss. So perhaps it's a blessing in disguise during times like this. But certainly we all, we shared the sense of social isolation. I was particularly impressed by Ruth's comment that she doesn't feel that she's doing anything useful for the community. That's something that I guess I tend to feel all the time, not just during the COVID virus. Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, thank you, Belinda. Thank you. And welcome if you're a new member. Welcome. And the faith community is an important community, the family of choice, right? Wonderful. Let me see who that can, it's a little bit hard to organize this well. Let me set, Scott, can you be next? And with whom did you talk?
Are you talking about me? I'm sorry.
Yes, there's only one Scott on my screen.
Oh,
Welcome, Scott. You have the platform.
okay, so I'll meet quickly because I have to attend an educational committee meeting. Sorry.
I'm glad I cut you.
Yeah. So I was privileged to be paired with the K's, and Sunny kind of summarized very well. You know, in their case, their retirement situation and the community in which they live has provided a lot of advantages that many of us perhaps on this call have, unlike people who are in different financial or familial straits, people whose income has been affected, unlike my income has not been affected. So based upon my conversation with them, I think we share the feeling, quote, that we're lucky, and that we realize that the disparities that exist within our society probably have been emphasized by this, or exacerbated is what I would say. And I guess I'm speaking more about myself than them, but I shared the thought that this is brought to the forefront, I think, what many of us in the Jewish community, in the professional Jewish community, have had in the back of our minds, that the way we've been doing business all these years really wasn't optimal. And this has sort of put it out front and center that we're going to have to think of, be serious about doing things differently. There's no normal to return to.
Wow. It's too bad that you're leaving, because I would love to hear more. What the fault lines, what were the breaking points? Can you speak a little bit more to it, because you have to leave?
Well, my suspicion, and I think it's probably borne out by evidence, that exciting Jewish things and engaging Jewish things have become more and more and more decentralized. And people finding their own.
Principal told me that I had to leave completely and that I couldn't come back unless I changed my hair.
And people have, finding, to use the terminology now, they're finding their own Zoom connections. And those Zoom connections either in addition to or bypass the traditional institutions that we've been accustomed to supporting all these years.
I hear you. The plurification or the decentralization. It's also
and I think I've been privileged as have been privileged to take some very fascinating educational opportunities, like you, Professor Oberman. There have been excellent opportunities to learn online that have probably challenged your university institutions and college institutions. You can get the top professors in the world teaching you free of charge as an audit,
Sorry.
That's probably a challenge to universities and colleges that has been in the offing for a long time. Just driving by the campus today, I'm thinking, how many people who have deep pockets who are angels are going to want to put up buildings in their name when buildings are empty and may continue to be empty for financial and practical reasons having nothing to do with the pandemic.
Right. But that's actually a whole session that we could see, a rethinking institution post the pandemic, and the downfalls of what you're noticing, that we're decentralizing, we're losing each other because everybody's going their own way, the central community where we all come together, and also the renewal, right? We have to do things.
Yeah, and you mentioned how it had a profound religious impact on Athens. When the gods did not.
In 7 minutes, how about that? Or I'll check in with you.
4. All right, who are we gonna get stuff like that?
Recreate. 5. Create. How is this working? Open.
Not well.
Not well?
All right, now we got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And writers have deadlines, and you can push them just so far. So
yes, I understand that. I wrote for years for the Arizona Jewish Coast before leaving the country. So I get it.
Yes.
I get it.
So that was, the first question was kind of easy, because I think we've all been thinking about how it is to live with this. And again, my husband and I, all of our material needs are met, and some of our social needs, because we have each other and we have neighbors and we can take walks, etc. You've cut your head off.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My polenta is burning in the pot, so I just
no, you don't want burnt polenta.
But it's all good. It's all good.
That's a sin. But I haven't thought particularly, and therefore I don't want to use the time that we have, about Professor Oberman's question: how should faith do things? I'm involved in a faith that's very social justice committed. Hello, I'm Ellen.
Hi, Ellen. This is Jacques.
Hi.
He's rescuing the polenta for me. So.
We don't want it burnt, Jacques.
No, we don't want it burnt. Bob, you're still muted, if you weren't aware, but
okay.
Yeah, it is a little bit of for me, it is a little bit of a harder sharing to say how faith will affect us in the after the COVID, after the time of COVID. I mean, for me, the whole faith thing was, I mean, I'm a pretty committed Jew, but I will always value the saying on one of my t-shirts I got in Tucson, which is the Dalai Lama saying that my religion is kindness. And so I just think that getting the perspective of, we're lucky. There are people who have far less. There are people who really struggle because they can't go to work or they lost their jobs. And so I'm hoping that this situation, when it's over, as far as the pandemic goes, I'll remain sensitive. Like in this country, it's the land of the tips. I mean, people are always got their hand out for a tip. They'll help you get out of your parking space, or they'll whatever. They'll juggle at the intersection or and so people are always looking for some money and realizing how hard it is. I've been just kind of multiplying the amount that I'll put in someone's hand, and it's a small thing, but I see it in people's eyes that they recognize that they're not getting the usual 100 pesos. And so, but you know, the whole hardship for me is getting people to understand that we're in this together. And just because you don't want to wear a mask because it's uncomfortable for you, you're not really wearing it for you, you're wearing it for everybody else. Because we really do have, for me, I feel like we really need to take care of each other. And so, you know, obviously that's hopefully not going to carry past the end of the pandemic, but that the idea that, you know, we're in this together, whatever it may be, because there'll be some other situation that you know we'll have to manage to get through. So that's my take. I'm sorry, Jacques making the pulling noise here. Thank you. Maybe I'm going to mute at this point. So.
So Bob, over to you.
Well, I had two thoughts that came out of all the conversation that was had before, including Rabbi Salson and others. And he talked about it in sort of institutional terms about Judaism. Another was talking about it in personal terms, and that has to do with transformation. Because I think that religion is about transformation, or can be about transformation. And the question becomes whether people are either going to resist transforming themselves in terms of values and priorities and try to hold on to, quote, normality for themselves and for their situations, or whether people are going to be flexible and fluid and go with the flow. And then how do they figure out what that is? And a lot of people are resisting transforming their values and their priorities. They're frustrated by it because they can't get the things that they used to have. But the question is whether they can ever get the things they used to have and what role religion might play in trying to, and Renee says correctly, the idea of community versus individuality is a tenet of a lot of our religious traditions. But, you know, as with so many things, it's blah, blah, blah until the rubber meets the road. And then it's like, yeah, all of us, but me first. So I don't know. That's some thoughts.
I have my own concerns that the social divisions, which include religious ones, because there's been a sort of splitting off of some and well-funded sects of Christianity who have politicized their religion and vice versa. And my concern is that that will persist. Well, many things will persist with the new administration. But there are also now, at some level, religious divides that were begun. Maybe they were just papered over, but there were some genuine, you know, mutuality and respect for the other people's traditions and learning about them. I experienced that at the temple I belonged to in Massachusetts, where we had wonderful lunches with rabbis and pastors and priests talking about text and interpreting it in the modern world. But my concern is that all the divisions, the social ones, the economic ones, will take us back 50 years in religious respect. That's all. I'm not saying it very well, so I'll stop.
Well, I think the great example, and you mentioned a lot of them, but one of the examples that's going on right now in New York is the Hasidic communities that are protesting that they have religious freedom, and that under God's direction, they have the freedom to act in ways that scientifically, to go back to the whole Jonathan Sachs thing, in ways that we are all convinced are deadly, but they have the right to do it because it's a religious, it's bad with their religion, our religion. Marcia, you have something?
This is about faith. I don't know how much of it is tied to religion, but I think faith gets people through really tough times and hope. And so, and I think that's signaling positivity. And I think when you have faith and you're positive about something, you can get through it a lot more easily. And also, the way you feel spiritually and psychologically, I think, has an effect on health. And I agree that during this pandemic, it's like we wear a mask to protect ourselves, but we wear it to protect each other. So I think that feeling of we're all in this together is very, it's uplifting. I think it helps our mind as well as our physical being. So I guess that's just about all I have to say. But I think faith is very personal. But for me, I've always felt that resilience and faith helps you get through really tough times.
Well, but faith isn't always personal. In fact, it's politic pretty frequently. And my hypothetical would be, if you were in a state where the predominant political force was allied, this is a hypothetical, but was allied with a religious force that said no masks. It's a hypothetical, it's what it is, but said no masks. Knowing that masks work, that's the other part of it. We'll know that masks work. What then is the role of faith?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference. I think you've nailed it, Bob. I think there's a really big difference between faith and then religion, as religion can engender blind faith. We do it because this is what God tells us to do, and people are totally convinced of that they have the direct line to the divine word. And so faith is personal. People choose to make religion personal, and that's where it can get sticky, because you'll never convince most people that their brand of religious faith is not for everyone. So that it's just a really hard condition in the world. And it's been, I mean, it makes me so sad that religion has caused more death than almost any other belief in the world. So there we have it.
Yeah. Hello, Bob. Welcome back. Great to see. Marcia and I are just talking, is faith personal or political? And Belinda is back. Let's give the other rooms. Let me see if I have to do anything. Were you automatically sent back, Bob and Belinda? Or
Yes.
were you? Good.
Yes.
So we will, let's see.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry,
Everybody-
Bob. I probably pressed something that threw me out of the room, the breakout room sooner. Sorry about that. I was interested in the conversation though.
We are all learning. Thank you all for coming back and being back. And I want to end by first kind of reminding everybody that we are in the front line of big political debates and polarization. As we see, should we keep faith institutions open, or should we close them? Should we be part of, so the government tell us from a point of authority, to close gatherings and religious get-togethers, or should we, be more organic and say that in this time of need, we should, the church and the temples and the mosques should be open. Believers worldwide are running afoul of public health authorities, warning that communal gatherings in Keystone for much religious practice must be limited to combat the disease spread. However, in some cases, religious fervor has led people towards cures that have no grounding in science, and in others, it has drawn them to spread places and rites that could increase the risk of disease. As we know, in South Korea, the have been considered super spreaders, and also mosque in Malaysia and Orthodox Jewish congregations have, of course, really held to the importance of getting together in community. The problem is that social distancing can leave faithful feeling distance of God and feeling distance of their community, and especially those who do not have great internet and gadgets to connect. It is a very lonely time, and how should the faithful respond? So let me see where my end is. I want to open up the forum to all of you. As a community, you are a faith community. What is the role of faith? Is it private? Is it public? And how should we lead by example and motivate others? And how will we come out of this, as Rabbi Scott was saying, not more alienated or more decentralized, but how can we all come together again as one religious tradition, and also as one nation? So with this, I want to open the floor to all of you, and I'm going to leave it to you who wants to speak and who doesn't. Thank you all for coming and sharing in this experiment of, and please let Bob know if this worked with breakout rooms or not. We want to learn from your experience or how we can tweak it to make it better in the future. But at this moment, I want to bring our collective understanding. How does faith inform the public health and public crisis at the moment? And the floor is open.
So there was a question in our group whether you meant that as like, from the government, utilizing faith to inform public, or was it like, people's individual reactions of faith towards public health? So wondering how you meant the question. To me, like, I am not appreciating how government in the past, 10 years has mixed all, religion and government, and that the firewalls for receiving government money have been blown away, so that a religious organization can discriminate and can do all these things and proselytize, even though they're receiving the money. They don't have to segregate that. So I think, in terms of from above, it needs to be science-based, but maybe you can inspire religion to the religious impulse to build community, to be responsible towards others, and use that. Though, by your chart, there's a serious problem in the Christian community and the Republican community about that. This idea of individualism and you can't tell me, and freedom of speech extended to the item and item, when freedom of speech is balanced between, like, you can't yell fire, you can't harm people. I think there needs to be laws on freedom of speech which says, if you're saying things that cause somebody to have to get protection, or that he has to pay for that.
Yeah, I want to open, Marcia, you had also I want to quickly just follow up, Beth, just because I'm personally, do you think it's the Christian, especially a Christian problem versus a Jewish problem? Is the Jewish community better at, I just wanted to ask you that. And you don't.
I'm in this WhatsApp group with this Chabad-based sort of community, and the crap they pull out is just astounding. The reason that it's 20% of Jews don't is because that's the portion of this ultra-right, ultra-Orthodox, Chabad kind of based community, which says, like, yay Trump, despite, that he's totally antithetical to his view, and saying, we're against, vaccines, like the government shouldn't be able to tell us to do that. And, this total sense that they don't have a responsibility to the wider community. And that's why in these communities that it's just spread. So there's something, it's something about that kind of community, whether it be Christian, Jewish, or other.
It's the division between church and state, and this is before the pandemic, that I think is beginning to undermine, that the firewalls that made America great is being undermined. That did I
Right. Well, the thing is that, I think too, this administration undermines that first, they interpret that First Amendment wrong. Freedom of religion doesn't mean that if you don't believe in gay marriage, that means you don't have to, in a public place, serve gay people in a restaurant or bake a cake for them or whatever. I mean, that keeping your rights doesn't mean that you can take the rights away from somebody else. You don't need to practice what you don't believe, but then you can't keep discriminating against people who believe differently from what you believe.
Yeah, Eileen has her hand up. Yes, please go.
Belinda had made an interesting statement that faith versus authority, and you have to make a choice. Okay.
Responsibility versus authority.
Yeah, you have to make a choice between your faith, doing the right thing, and if the authority, meaning the president or the governor or someone else, says you're not mandated to wear a mask or whatever, so then you're kind of caught. If you are a religious person, hopefully you will choose to do the right thing. If there's an authority somewhere that says you don't have to do it, and you are at the drugstore or at the grocery store where you have to go, and most people aren't wearing the mask, sometimes you feel out of the ordinary. So if you're not strong in what you believe or what you think is right for keeping yourself safe, the authority can go against what your faith is mandating from you.
What I actually meant was that we have the authority in America to not wear a mask if we don't want to. That, however, conflicts with what should go along with authority, which is responsibility. Responsibility for others, responsibility for yourself, responsibility for making the world a better place. That was what I meant by authority versus responsibility. The other thing is, I don't think that there's anything inherent in Christianity that contributes, well, maybe there is. Maybe I was raised as a Roman Catholic. I don't know that there is anything inherent in the basic beliefs of Christianity that make it less likely that Christians would look to the good of the community rather than to their own, more than that Christians would be less likely to look to the good of a community than would Jews. There might be an answer to why more Christians want the communal services to start, simply because Christians, unlike Jews, are more dependent on the passing your faith through a priest to God. There is more of a sense that you can't sort of do it on your own. That's my view.
I'm gonna get in here on a point I wasn't going to make, and then 2 points I was going to make. Please let us not use terms like Christians or Jews. Both are huge tents with all kinds of sideshows in them. So no more of that, because you can't be right about it no matter what you say. Now, these are my 2 points. First of all, this is an example. What's going on in the pandemic in terms of authority or government or whatever is a classic example of the very porous, constantly rebuilt wall between church and state in America. It's never going to be resolved. It's always going to be dynamic. I have studied it. I can tell you that. It's where it is now. It's where Amy Coney Barrett wants to put it. It's a lot of places. But this is the hypothetical I put to our small group, and they may want to say something about it, but for anybody. Let's say you're in a locality or a state that happens to be dominated by a particular religious tradition group. And that particular religious tradition group says, we don't mask, we don't socially distant, we run this state in a democratic way. That's the hypothetical. If you believe in science or another tradition or both, you're going to say, wow, that can't happen. Well, maybe or maybe not. And where does that put us? And does that tell us that perhaps there are situations like this one where we just sweep aside those considerations and say, no, there's a prime consideration that doesn't go there. And I want to mention, since we had this Christians, Jews thing, I did also mention the fact that in New York, there's a huge conflict going on right now between a huge Hasidic community that says we do not do social distancing or masking because God told us we don't have to do it. And they're at war now with de Blasio and Cuomo. But those are my comments for the moment.
Right, there's an important, I think there are 3 actually roles, is do we believe, does the government have the authority or the responsibility? Does faith communities have their own responsibility, authority? And does science, do we believe in science?
Yeah.
Well, 3 sources. Actually, I want to invite Sylvie because we haven't heard, I cut you off. Is there anything you want to add? I want to hear your voice, just give you a platform that I want to recognize you as well. And you have to unmute yourself.
She's gone.
I made the point in one of our discussion groups that I feel very strongly that from a faith-based perspective or ethical perspective, or even a science perspective, we need to work very hard to bring some form of socialized medicine or Medicare for all into our nation. We're so far behind, and I've lived in Canada, and although it doesn't often come up to the top of the list with a medical program that works for all, it's very good. And here we are in a pandemic where so many people don't have any health insurance. And I think it's our responsibility for people who think to try to get this through. And it's really a quagmire because we have great resistance and independence of thinking. And as our election just shows us, it's almost half a nation that supports the complete antithesis of this. And I think it's really holding us back. So from the point of view of the ethical thing to do, it seems only right to me. And that way we may be prepared for the next pandemic if there is one that threatens us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. A very important point. Yes, Beth.
I was just thinking this idea of like, you know, this idea that of the rights of the church separate from the state. Does the state have the right to impose the church? And I think the highest value is pikuach hanefesh, right? Saving a life. A virus doesn't care, you know, that you're, you know, getting together for a faith community. It doesn't make any difference. It's got to be based on saving a life and science that has the higher authority.
Eileen, yeah, Eileen had her hand up. Yes, go ahead.
the thing that really astonishes me is if there is the science, Fauci and Bix and these other people that are telling us what it is and how we can squelch the virus, why don't people want to save themselves? Why are they so indignant to say, I don't have to do this, I don't have to do that, when all it would take is washing your hand, not all it would take, but to help you stave it off. So why do people want to commit suicide with it? I don't get it.
I think that Harold has an answer.
Yeah, I think there's a simple answer to this. The mask doesn't protect me. It's the PR.
Doesn't protect me.
Your mask protects me. My mask doesn't protect me. So why should I wear a mask?
No, it's something else. Because I just ended, I got blocked from a relationship from 11 years with this ultra right-wing man. He doesn't believe it's pandemic. He thinks the government's lying. And Trump was all part of this. And he thinks wearing masks causes you to get fungal disease, that wearing masks is dangerous, and that herd disease, it's the whole conspiracy theory notion, and that herd immunity, like, at pox parties are good. Like the fact that the numbers mean that like a huge portion of people will die, you do that, run the other. I think the other part of the problem is even those who say masks are good, the guy who said it, like, oh, wear a mask. Was he wearing his mask at the time? No, his mask was in his hand. Like, why are these people going up and taking their mask off to speak? If you want to demonstrate that masks work, then I think we need more demonstration from our public officials to be wearing a mask, even when they're speaking in front of a crowd, even though they have social distancing. The image should be that everyone's wearing a mask, not that you take it off when you speak.
I think that I've seen Ellen's hand up go first, and then Harold, you're second. Ellen.
I'm saying, the point
Wait,
I
Ellen
make,
has to unmute herself. Oh, she's going to wait. Harold, you get first, and then Ellen will unmute herself. Please go ahead, Harold.
I was interrupted while I was speaking.
He was correct. Yes.
You speak.
Okay, the point I wanted to make is that the PR about the mask is wrong. As long as it doesn't protect you, you're not interested for a lot of people. An example of this is seatbelts. Why are seatbelts so popular? We get everyone to wear a seatbelt. The seatbelt doesn't protect anybody else. It only protects you. So the concept of wearing the mask, the PR associated with it, started wrong and is wrong. As long as people believe it doesn't really protect them, a lot of people are not going to wear the mask. Now, I don't know how you change the concept, the perception that the mask really doesn't protect them. In reality, it does. Everyone wears a mask. We get rid of the virus. But the concept that, gee, if I don't wear a mask, what risk am I taking? That's the concept that is hurting them.
I don't want to interrupt, but I want to correct. The CDC about 10 days ago revised their advice, their advisory to include that information. Doesn't mean, yes, they started off on a different foot. That's all I wanted to say.
No, Bob, you're right, but there's an old Latin expression, "Gunnish helping" at this point. It's not going to help very much at this point.
It's already politicized. Ellen, I want to hear your voice.
So briefly, something I've had to say to myself and others over and over again is you cannot put a logical template over an emotional response. And to the degree that all of us, and I think we Jews that are in the room, think that by Talmudic reasoning and logic and a desire for the highest level of learning just really leaves out that most people make decisions not with their heads. And, if we all had $1 for everyone who says, my gut tells me something, and I want to say you know, that's not the function of your stomach. Although there is emotional regulation that does happen with some of the hormones. So that's it. Don't look for a logical template because it's in whatever. I said it. I thank you for
There's
the time.
research behind that were more intuitive, and then the post hoc rationalization that we respond on our gut, and intuitive evolved to know what's right and wrong, and it's very hard, but we can change. And I think messaging, Harold, is very important. And the question is, can we correct ourselves if we get it wrong? And Marcia, I would love to hear your voice.
Marcia, you know what? Thank you. What I was going to say is, it's illegal to drive without a seatbelt. There's reasons for that. It's illegal to smoke within 6 feet of many places. So there's no reason why there can't be a mask mandate, because it's been proven, just like seatbelts and just like non-smoking, making rules against smoking saves lives. There's no reason why there can't be a mandate. Governor Cuomo did it. And now the North Dakota governor, who didn't have any rules at all, while his state was being blown away by the virus, he finally did it, made a state mask mandate. And our mayor of Tucson has made one. I mean, you can't go into Bosch's or Fry's or Safeway or Walmart without wearing a mask. There's no reason why that cannot be mandated for the safety of all of the constituents.
Okay, Ellen, a response. Yes, go ahead.
Ellen or Eileen?
Eileen, sorry.
Eileen, okay. The seatbelt thing, you can be caught by a policeman and he can fine you. With a mask, that hasn't happened yet. Although my daughter-in-law's sister lives in Italy. They had to have another lockdown. You will be fined $1,000 if you walk around without a mask. And I have a feeling that because it's not deemed illegal here, that once they do, I'm glad for the mayor, I think there has to be something like that put on you for you to do the right thing.
Yes, go ahead, Marcia. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to say something that I found the nice person who was talking about Medicare for all and who had lived in Canada. In 2012, I was on an Israeli trip, and there were 2 Canadian couples on our tour. And it was October of 2012, before the 2012 elections. And they said, we wish that Canadians could vote in American elections because everything that happens in America impacts Canada so much. And we would vote for Obama because, we like his policies better, but also because of his health care. Because she said, I mean, one of them had a real tragedy where her daughter died of lung cancer. And she said, we would have been, besides the grief, we would have been totally wiped out if it hadn't been for Canada's healthcare policy. So I just wanted to put that into the person who mentioned that. I'm glad that you did, because there's no other civilized nation that doesn't have some kind of universal healthcare for all of its citizens. And so I hope that we do eventually. It's been started, and there's no reason why we can't all, have that.
I'm going to give the last word to, I think it's Carol. Yes, you get the last word because we have way over time. And
Okay.
I want to, yes, hear.
I love everybody's input. There are a couple of realities, folks. We're not going to see significant change until Biden and Harris come on noon on January 20th. That's the first reality. Trump is keeping his team of whoever they are for COVID, deliberately not talking. Now, this is what I'm getting at, is communicating. You've got a few levels of issues. You got a level of working together. You have a level about science. You also have a level of leaders who turn their back and make fun of people with masks, take their masks off in public and create a TV, like a big shot appearance on the balcony. I'm sure many have seen it. What's the messaging? The messaging is this isn't important, this isn't okay, it's going to turn around the corner. So the people who are minimal thinkers, and please, that's the best I can call them, they want a leader, a cult leader who tells them how to brush their teeth, how to think, how to proceed in anything. They are seduced by these messages. And until we can get some new leadership that changes the narrative, nothing is going to change. And I have to tell you that straight up. In the background is Biden and Harris and Fauci and Osterholm and some others who are already working on it. It's doable. We just can't get past this man and his craziness and ignorance and not the human person.
We heard you. I want to add at the final, we do also need the Senate, or else Biden and Harris can't do very much. But talking for somebody who comes from Europe and still has the Second World War in her bones, talking about how that is passed down since generations, I'm very grateful. I was counting on the Americans to not go for a dictator. And it was pretty scary to watch. I always say, I love being in America. It's never boring. And I was saying, okay, cut the boringness. I want something very boring. And we might have it with Biden, he can keep his promise and be very boring and cooperate. But I want to thank you all very, very much. These are so important conversations, and we won't solve it, but I think they are important to have and to keep going on. And thank you, Bob. This is an incredible platform and bringing us all together. I'm ever so grateful.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you,
Thank
Daga.
you.
I know
Bob still wants to say something.
I have 2 minutes of announcements, but before I get to the official ones, I want to say 2 things. First of all, Carol, thank you for the term minimal thinkers.
Yeah.
Because I haven't heard that one before, and that's a lot better than the S word, which I use a lot. So that's good. Second unplanned comment is to thank Dr. Oberman even more than I wanted to, because I will tell you, we've done these live. I think a lot of you've attended the live ones, and this was by far of the Zoom ones the closest we've come to the feeling and the interaction and the energy of our live sessions. Extraordinary in that score, and extraordinary in terms of the content and in terms of the direction. So I don't have enough thanks to give. It was a great session. So thank Dr. Oberman for that.
Great guinea pigs. We just have to
The
spread the
guinea
word.
pigs, the guinea pigs all survived the experiment and actually enjoyed it. So that you don't always get that from guinea pigs.
Right.
Our next salon is Sunday, December 6th at 2 p.m. with Dr. Alex Nava, Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Arizona. The topic is racial injustice, the Torah, and hip hop. Very cool. Okay, you can register and find the schedule of salons and Jewish lifelong learning at tetucson.org. It's in the learning, there's a tab for learning. Between now and our next salon is Thanksgiving. As with so many other events, we can save this coming holiday that it will be a Thanksgiving like no other we have experienced. Those who know me, and many of you do, will not be surprised by my selecting a few words from Abraham Joshua Heschel to guide us through Thanksgiving. He said, "Our goal should be to live life in radical amazement. Get up in the morning and look at the world in a way that takes nothing for granted. Everything is phenomenal. Everything is incredible. Never treat life casually. To be spiritual is to be amazed. So have an amazing Thanksgiving. Thank you all, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you all.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
rest of the Sunday.
Thank you.